All right, while I get set up here, struggling with three things. Alan thinks I'm old. Zoe's trying to introduce instrumental music in the worship. And I've never met Zoe, and that was too soon to be making that joke, but I did anyway. And the third thing is, I didn't choose a particularly short lesson, so I'm hoping we get out by Super Bowl, but no promises there. So I want to just really quickly say thank you for welcoming us in. 2023 was a roller coaster for us. We spent 3 weeks in England, and it was an amazing adventure, the biggest thing our family has ever done. And then we had some hardships, and I think God blesses us, and there's always that dark cloud behind the blessing. He blessed us, and then we had some challenges. We decided to step away from Avon, and that was the hardest thing we've ever done as a family. You guys made that easier by embracing us. And then Dad passed away 3 months ago, and just to put the icing on the cake. And so that was really tough. And you guys, I heard from almost all of you just that you were thinking of us, and you guys made that more bearable. We bear each other's burdens. So I do want to also address Dawson's announcement of us deciding to place membership. He said that we had scrutinized you and found that you were not perfect. I just want to say I never said any of those words. So now I can't find anything I'm looking for here. So we'll just go with this for now. So I do appreciate everybody just welcoming us in, and I pray this morning we can learn together. So you guys just acted like we were one of you, so I'm just going to act like I'm one of you too. And our theme for this year is Our Life Together, and I saw the subtitle is Living Peaceably. Is that right? Or did you throw that on this morning? You threw that on this morning. I was about to say, so I do want to, in keeping with that, Our Life Together, talk about peace. And just really quickly, this is one of my pet peeves, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is just an introduction. There's this theme of peace throughout Scripture. It's part of God's character. God is the God of peace. And again, I've got some verses up there. We're not going to read those because this is just my intro. But if you want the slides, I'll be happy to share them with you if you want to look at each of the verses. It's a blessing from God. We were reading in Acts 9 this morning. The church throughout Judea enjoyed a time of peace. Peace is a blessing. I will make my face shine on you and give you peace. So it's a great blessing from God. God's covenant is described as a covenant of peace. He wants to make peace with us, and the covenant that we have with Him is peace. The Hebrew greeting, shalom, means peace be with you, and so there's almost not an epistle that doesn't have something about peace, either a greeting or a salutation. And so peace is really important, and it's commanded by God. We're supposed to live in peace. Psalm 34 commands us to live in peace. Romans 12, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with all men. We're familiar with this idea of peace, but I tell you what, Jesus took it further and said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit, or they shall be called children of God. If you want to be known as one of God's children, then your life will be characterized by peacemaking. That's a pretty bold statement. There's a hymn that we sing, how sweet, how heavenly is the sight when those who love the Lord and one another's peace delight and so fulfill the word. When we delight in each other's peace, it fulfills God's word, the hymnist writes. When each can feel his brother's sigh and with him bear a part, when sorrows flow from eye to eye and joy from heart to heart. This picture of like we're so connected that we can feel each other's sorrow and sigh and also rejoice with one another. When free from envy, scorn, and pride, our wishes all above, each can his brother's failings hide and show a brother's love. When there is peace, we like cover up each other's character flaws and we muffle those and we amplify the love that person has. That's a beautiful picture when love in one delightful stream through every bosom flows. Let union sweet and dear esteem in every action glow. This picture of peace in God's kingdom, in the church, and in our lives is just beautiful. But as my father-in-law points out, peace is kind of hard. It's hard to live at peace. My father-in-law has this saying, to live above with saints we love, oh, that will be glory. But to live below with the ones we know, well, that's another story. Right? And I know we all have times where we just go, man, my life is just devoid of peace right now. I just want some peace. The truth is, peace is hard. You know, marriages fail because there's no peace. Families are broken apart. Friendships are torn apart. Companies sue each other all the time. Churches split because peace is hard. And it all starts with conflict. So what I want to do today is kind of give an introduction or an overview of this book called The Peacemaker. How many people have read this book? Anybody? Oh, good. It means it's going to be new for all of you. Awesome. Okay, so it's a wonderful book. It probably is the most practical application of Christianity that I have ever come across. So I'm going to introduce it here, give you the highlights, and then hopefully whet your appetite where you dig into this more, because it is a huge topic, which is why the sermon might not be as short. So I like to start out with a story, because I feel like I can relate when there's a story. So I want to read this. It's in the book. It's in one of the first few pages. So I'm going to read this. It's about this family who's having some conflict in carrying out the last will and testament of their parents, okay? Don't you try to come in, Frank yelled through the door. I have a bat and I'll hit anyone who comes in. Come on, open the door, Frank, Joe responded from the porch. We just want to talk. This is getting out of control, Jenny said as she pulled at Joe's arm. I think we should call our lawyer and have him talk with Frank. But the realtor and the buyer will be here in 10 minutes. The deal's going to fall apart if they can't get in and look at the house. Well, it'll fall apart a lot worse if Frank goes after them with a bat. I'm going to call him right now and postpone the meeting until we can do something with Frank. Okay, but I won't let him hold this sale up forever. You've got 2 days to get him out of here, Jenny, and after that, I'm going to come back with my own bat. I'm sure John and Matt will be happy to join me. Joe stormed over to his car and drove out of the farmyard, venting his anger by spinning a wave of gravel across the yard. As Jenny drove back to town, she felt utterly trapped between her 4 brothers. Ever since their mother died, they had been fighting over the farm. Frank had been born with a disability that had kept him at home all his life. In the early years, their mother had cared for him, but as her health failed, Frank became the caregiver, rarely leaving her side. When she finally succumbed to a massive stroke, Frank's world collapsed. Things got worse when their mother's will was read. She and their dad had established a trust many years earlier to provide for Frank. In their wills, they left the farm equally to their other 4 children. Now that both parents were dead, Joe, John, and Matt wanted to sell the property as quickly as possible. And when they told Frank, he was terrified at the prospect of moving out of the only home he had ever lived in. As he resisted the idea, heated arguments ensued, and now Frank is cornered in the lonely farmhouse. Although Jenny needed the money from the sale as much as her brothers did, she didn't like the idea of forcibly evicting Frank. The 3 brothers were oblivious to his fears and determined to push ahead. Jenny felt powerless to stop them. Then she remembered that her pastor had recently attended a seminar on biblical peacemaking. A brief call to him led to a meeting that night. Listen how the meeting went. "Look, Pastor," Joe said, "I'm only asking that we honor Mom's wishes and follow the law. She and Dad decided years ago to set up a trust for Frank and divide the farm among the rest of us. As a personal representative for her estate, it's my legal responsibility to honor her will. I know it'll be a little hard on Frank to move out, but there's a nice apartment complex in town. He'll settle in there in no time." "But it could kill him," Jenny pleaded. "Losing Mom devastated Frank. If we force him out of the house, he'll lose everything that's familiar to him. I'm afraid of what it'll do to him." "So what do?" Matt interjected. "Just sit around until he dies years from now and then finally divide up the property? I've got 2 kids in college, and if Mom were here, I'm sure she'd want to see the farm sold to help them out." "I agree with Joe. We should honor Mom's will and follow the law." "I appreciate your respect for your mother and for the law," Pastor Barry said. "But there's something else to consider. All of you profess to be Christians. So what is the difference between the way you're handling this conflict and the way a good atheist would handle it?" After several moments of awkward silence, Joe finally replied, "I'm not sure I see your point." "Well, let me put it another way. What's more important to you in this situation? To get your money as soon as possible, as most people would, or to demonstrate the love of Christ to your brother?" "Oh, I see," said John. "You want us to be good little Christians who just give in to others and walk away from what's rightfully ours." "No, that's not what I'm saying. God loves justice, and He certainly wants you to respect your parents' wishes. But there's something He wants even more: to see you treating one another in a way that shows the power of the gospel in each of your lives." "That sounds good, Pastor," Joe replied, "but I just don't see how religion applies to this problem." "Well, if you really want to know, let's pray together right now and ask God to show you how you can resolve this conflict in a way that honors Him and fulfills your parents' wishes." God answered their prayers in a way Joe never expected. I'm not going to tell you what that was till the end. You got to wait. So there's conflict. And I want to define what we mean by conflict. The subscript of this is resolving conflict biblically. Conflict is a difference in values, desires, opinions, or purpose that frustrates one's goals. So you see the difference of opinion. Well, we got to do what the will says. We got to sell the property and divide it among us, right? Well, what's that going to do to Frank? There are different values at play. Conflict, and this is broad enough to work on a lot of different levels, but there's conflict in every single relationship. And this is why I feel like this topic is the most practical of anything I've come across, because if you're married, you have conflict in your marriage. You have differences of opinion, differences in values, right? So from little tiny things like where are we going to eat for lunch to really big things like should we buy this house? Should I take this job? Right? Well, I think you should. Well, I don't think that I should, right? Parents, children, siblings, parents, you know you have conflict with your children, and I know anybody here that's in school under the age of 20 has conflict with your parents. You struggle. You want to understand what they're telling you to do, but you just have a different perspective, right? Friends, school, at work, at church, there's going to be conflict. Of course, we have conflict with our enemies, right? So what happens is when we come across conflict, we respond to it in a couple of ways. So before I talk about the right way, let me just mention a few ways that we improperly handle conflict. First, escape responses. Like we just want to get out of here. We deny. Oh, nothing's wrong. Is something wrong? Are you okay? I'm fine. I'm good. We're good. Right? Are you sure? My wife will push until she gets it out of you, right? But we like to just pretend like nothing's wrong. We avoid. We just go, you know what? I'm just not going to talk to that person about that topic because it's going to bring up conflict. Or we flee, right? We just go, you know what? I just can't be friends with that person, or I've got to just get away from this situation. And instead of trying to resolve it and reconcile, we just decide, all right, I'm just going to leave, right? And we'll talk about what it looks like a little bit. He goes into more detail in the book about when do you leave? When is the situation beyond repair? But if we just go, you know what? Every time I come across a conflict, I just get out of there, and right, we escape. And of course, the ultimate escape is suicide. Like we have no hope that anything is going to get better, and that there will never be peace. So that's the ultimate despair. So some people like to escape, and sometimes we do both of these, and some people are more attack responses, like verbal assault. Like you can get people to submit to what you want. You'll just roll over them, right? At work, we had difficult personalities workshop. And one of them we called the tank. Like the tank is big and heavy, and it will just plow over anybody that gets in their way to do what they want to do. Mike, you have a different idea? Okay, I'm just going to ignore you and find somebody that agrees with me. Physical assault, obviously. There's conflict. You can get physical with that. Litigation, okay, well, we'll just settle this in court. I will sue. And of course, murder. So the reason that these are incorrect is one of them is neither of them are peacemaking. To escape is peace faking. I'll just pretend like there's no conflict here. And one is peace breaking. I'll just plow through and get what I want or just have my way here. And the conclusion is, well, man, every time there's a conflict, I'm either running or bowling people over, so conflict is just my enemy. But I want to suggest, and he suggests in this book, that the peacemaker perspective is that conflict is not the enemy. Here's a radical paradigm shift. Conflict is an opportunity. Really? So I shouldn't just avoid and run anytime there's conflict? Okay, what do I mean? Conflict is an opportunity. Can we redeem conflict? That's what God does, right? He takes stuff that we try and avoid, and he goes, you know what? I'm going to work through that, not around it. So, conflict is an opportunity. Opportunity to do what? First of all, we're going to look at a few passages here that I didn't realize had conflict in them. So 1 Corinthians 10. If this was a class setting, I want you guys to tell me 1 Corinthians 10 is about eating meat sacrificed to idols. Some people are like, hey, idols are nothing. We can eat that meat. And they're arguing. They've got conflict, a different set of values, because some people are like, hey, meat sacrificed to idols is an opportunity for us to show that we hate idols. So if you eat it, then you are sacrificing your values. So there's conflict there. What does God say? What does Paul write in 1 Corinthians 10:31? Well, let me cut through all that and say whether you're going to eat or not, whether you're going to drink or not, Actually, the principle is do it all for the glory of God. Okay, so let me just stop right here. If you get nothing else from this lesson, take this. It's what the pastor said. How are you going to act in conflict that is different because you're a Christian? Are you going to stay when you have a disagreement or somebody offends you, sins against you? At least do this. Stop and say, okay, how can I respond to this in a way that will glorify God? I can respond this in a way that will get me some money or get me what I deserve, or you can ask the question, how can I respond to where God will be glorified in this? Like, what can I do to imitate God? As cheesy as it sounds, we should be asking, what would Jesus do in this instance? Like, how can I respond that will show Christ in me? How can I serve others? Maybe this is not an area where I need to get what's due me, but rather, maybe this is an opportunity for me to serve others. And I can give up my rights to win somebody over to Christ. Bring the gospel into it. Sometimes it's just a way to acknowledge Him. When you start asking the question, what can I do in this situation to glorify God? It will change your action, and people will say, why'd you do that? How can you just forgive that person? Let me tell you, it's not me. It's the Lord working through me. I realize how much I've been forgiven, and guess what? You bring Christ, you bring the gospel into this conflict situation, because conflict is an opportunity to glorify God. Like when things are going really well and we're all getting along, sometimes you go, oh man, Christ is in this. But when things are going really poorly, like Joseph, and he's being mistreated time and time again, and yet he still forgives, you go, wow, there's something different about that guy. And it changes other people. So conflict is an opportunity to glorify God. Just ask yourself that question. Number 2, Matthew 7. That's the famous passage, judge not lest you be judged. And then stop right there, right? No, he goes on to say there's this conflict. These two men are blaming each other. One of them is saying, hey, you got a speck in your eye that you really need to take care of, buddy. Meanwhile, he's got a 2x4 sticking out of his eye. Here's a conflict, right? What are we going to do? Well, Jesus said, okay, when you're in conflict, instead of trying to look at everybody else's specks and all of their imperfections, I need to first go, what did I do to contribute to this conflict? What were my assumptions going into this that really made things hairy and messy? What did I do? You can ask that question and say, hey, Alan, I notice you think I'm old. What made you assume that, right? Or maybe it's, Alan, I feel like you've been really cold to me recently. Did I do anything to offend you? Did I say something I don't realize that I did, but I probably did because I'm an idiot? Can you tell me what that is? That's getting the log out of your own eye, right? Jesus wants us to examine ourselves in conflict. That passage in Psalm 139 where David says, search me, O God, see if there's any wicked way in me. Do you know how God does that? You're watching me, and you're seeing me, and you go, hey, Brad. Or I ask you, hey, what can I do to be a better person, be more fruitful in God's kingdom? Conflict reveals the idols in our hearts. Again, these are really big ideas here that he goes into, chapter or 2 in the book and really fleshes this out. But there are desires that we put priority on more than glorifying God. And it is conflict that reveals that. The reason that me and my wife are having this disagreement is probably almost undoubtedly because I have a desire in my heart, something that I want, and she is what I'm sacrificing to get it. Because idols always demand a sacrifice. So what are we sacrificing? At the end of the day, one of the guys that I like to listen to a lot says, whatever it is that you go, I will finally be happy and fulfilled when this happens. I would not be living in fear if whatever this is, that's your idol. That's what you're placing above everything else, including God. Right? If only we could pay off the house, then I would have financial peace. Okay, well, guess what? That's my idol. And if I'm not careful, I'm going to raise that up and sacrifice another relationship, my kids, my husband, my wife. Those things are going to be damaged because I will start judging them in what I do. Gently restores, the fourth opportunity. So in Galatians 6, says if anyone is caught in sin, that's a conflict. Like if I happen upon Austin and I recognize he is in a openly sinful situation, guess what? I go, oh man, now I got to talk to that guy. So peacemakers help others remove sin from their life. James chapter 5 is an amazing passage. It says that if you turn a sinner from his wicked ways, you will save his soul. Like I thought it was Jesus that was saving people's souls. And James says, you become an agent of Jesus and can save someone's soul by gently restoring it. You do it gently and lovingly. You help each other. And then lastly, when there's conflict, there's an opportunity to go and be reconciled. I had Caleb read this. I really appreciate Caleb's prayer too, that this is something we need to take and implement in every relationship. Like that person at work that you just have a hard time with, like you need to go, okay, how can I glorify God? What can I do to make God look like the most weighty thing in my life that I'm tethered to? And when storms come and want to rip me out, I'm tethered to God. What can I do to portray that? It involves confessing your sin. You want to really catch somebody off guard that's not a Christian, you go and say, hey, I need to confess something to you. I did this, and that really hurt you, and I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? You do that to somebody, they'll go, what? Excuse me, right? Extend forgiveness. Like people have a real hard time when you forgive somebody of something really big. It catches people off guard. When you overcome evil with good. So that passage, when you are on your way, in Matthew 5 that Caleb read for us, when you're on your way to present your offering at the altar, and you go, ooh, this guy has something against me. He says you need to stop right there and go take care of that. Somebody said it would be cool if instead of metal detectors when you come in a building, we had strife detectors. And you had to walk through, and if you had anything, any outstanding conflict with somebody, it would go off and you say, sorry, you can't worship today. You've got to first go take care of that, because that's how important. God doesn't want your worship if you aren't living in harmony with others to the extent that that you can, like, right? So that's how important it is. So conflict, above all the good times, conflict gives you the opportunity to glorify God. It is those times that are especially crucial to see the logs in your own eyes, to help people gently get their lives in order. Okay, so a couple things, like, for example, these are just really practical. Overlook. It is to a man's glory to overlook an offense. Now, that sounds overlooking an offense, like if Don does something and I just decide, you know what, I'm going to let that go. Is that denial? Am I pretending like there's no conflict? No. There's a slight difference there, and sometimes you don't know until a few days, few weeks later, whether or not you were denying or whether you truly overlooked. Because if you've been denying, it's going to stay in your head and you're going to be like, yep, Don still owes me $20. Or if you forget, Don comes up and he's like, hey, I owe you 20. You do? I had totally forgotten, right? So overlooking is there is conflict. I'm embracing it and I'm deciding I am going to pay that debt myself. I'm not going to look for Don to pay that debt. I'm going to pay it. Just like Jesus paid my debt, right? We can talk it out. Acts 15. There's this sharp disagreement about circumcision, and they discussed it carefully, right? There was conflict, and so one thing you can do biblically is to go and talk things out. Matthew 18 is kind of has the full picture here. Like when someone sins, go to them one-on-one and say, hey, help me out with this. I want to understand this better. So, mediate and counsel. So Paul says instead of running and taking each other to court, you should be like, well, hey, let's pull in coal and let's talk this out. Like, I think you should do this. You think you should do that. Let's get a third party in here, and let's not get angry with each other. Let's work this out. And then, of course, church discipline, right? Sometimes people have set up the idol, and the idol is so entrenched in their heart that they will not give it up. And sometimes we have to make that statement and say, hey, this is an idol in this person's heart, and we are not going to continue like there's nothing wrong here. And that may seem drastic, but sometimes, and God redeems things like that. So, be a peacemaker. Instead of seeing conflict as the enemy, that you try and avoid it at all costs, just get around it, break through it, whatever. Ask, well, how can I respond that will glorify God? How can I help get the log out of my eye? What did I do here to cause this conflict? Gently restore, be reconciled, right? Work together. Heap burning coals, like people that are really just seem like mortal enemies. Just keep praying for them and doing good to them. And that can't last. When someone hates you and is your enemy and you continue doing good to them, it won't continue that way. It can't. And this is how important it is. By John 13:35, by this all men will know you are my disciples if you have love for one another. This is not something we can just take or leave or, yeah, that's not my strength. No. People will know that we are his disciples if we have love for one another. Now, love does not equal peace, but they're really close relatives. And so when we love each other, we strive for peace. All right, so is that anybody wondering what happened to Frank? Okay, let me show you the. So, 3 weeks later, the entire extended family gathered together in the banquet room of a local restaurant. Jenny had somehow overcome Frank's fears and persuaded him to leave the house and join the family for dinner. 12 nephews and nieces watched with rapt attention as he walked into the room and nervously sat down at the end of the table. As the eldest son, Joe, asked for everyone's attention. Frank, our family is gathered together today to honor you. For the past 10 years, you devoted yourself to caring for my mom. Today, we want to present you with this special plaque. It says, to our brother Frank, the best of all sons, who cared for our mother with selfless love and undying devotion. Your companionship filled her life with joy and delight and was a constant reminder to her of the love of God. With deepest gratitude to a wonderful brother from Joe, John, Jenny, and Matt. Isn't that redeeming that conflict? Tears welled up in Frank's eyes as Joe handed him the plaque. Before he could speak, Joe handed him an envelope. Frank, he went on, in appreciation for all you did for Mom, we want to give you this gift. It's an agreement we have all signed that gives you a life estate in the farmhouse. That means you'll be able to stay there as long as you live. We found a buyer who's willing to purchase the rest of our farmland. Ownership of the house will eventually pass to our children, but as long as you want to live there, we want you to know it's your home. As Frank clutched the envelope, the dam of emotions finally burst. Months of uncertainty and fear gave way to sobs of relief and gratitude. As Joe leaned over and hugged his brother for the first time in years, Joe's teenage son leaned toward his sister and whispered, maybe there is a God after all, because there's no way Dad would have done this on his own. Isn't that beautiful? When you stop and ask, as a Christian, how am I going to handle this conflict? What am I going to do differently? And how can I glorify God? How can I see what I've contributed to this? How can I gently restore somebody? And how can I be reconciled to my brother? Beautiful picture. Again, it's a great book. We've studied it several times as a family and as a church in the past. So that's my overview of the book. I do think it's interesting to look back over those 4 opportunities because there was great conflict between us and God. We were his enemies. And what did he do? Did he say, I'm going to get what's due me? This guy deserves death and wrath and punishment. No. He said, I want to be glorified in this. So, you're forgiven. I'm going to bring peace to this relationship. I'm going to be the peacemaker. And I'm going to take the logs out of your eye. I am going to gently restore you, not harshly, not give you a law that you can never keep, but rather give you the perfect law of liberty that gives you freedom. And I'm going to reconcile you to me. That's what God has done in Jesus. And when we are peacemakers, we can be just like our Father and do that same thing to others. God's done that for you. If you haven't put on Christ as submitted to him as your Lord, then I encourage you to think soberly about that and always talk to those around you. We're going to stand and sing the invitations.